I'm John Wilson, and I'm a facilitator with Think Tank out of Springfield, Ohio, and they are working to help alleviate poverty in our communities by rebuilding the fabric of society. This is called the Cost of Poverty Experience. It's a simulation to help folks get into the lives of people who have lived in poverty or are living in poverty. They're going to jump into family roles of real people from the Dayton area who were willing to tell their story and share their lives with us, and we created roles around that. And the people who are going through the experience today are going to live for about an hour and a half of what it's like to live in poverty. So one of the things that people are going to get out of this experience of really what it's like to live a really under-resourced life, the anxiety, the stress, and sometimes that causes us to make different decisions that we would normally make than if we were living a really well-resourced life. I myself am a high school teacher, and I can tell you after 25 years of teaching, the Cost of Poverty Experience is the best educational tool that I've ever used. And if you're looking to learn more about how to bring this to your school or community, contact the folks at Think Tank Inc. up in Springfield, Ohio.
Hi, Carissa Jones. I work at Klein Elementary. I'm a reading specialist for Centerville City Schools. Just, I think, having an open mind and understanding there's not a black and white situation to everything. I try to take into consideration where my students are coming from and try to eliminate some of the barriers or help them go through any challenges that exist because of poverty. Yes, I definitely have to think out of the box with some of the things that I send home, or actually go ahead and give them the materials that they need. Sometimes you just have to take some of the obstacles away. I'm willing to go to people's houses, go to some of the apartment buildings that my students are, and you want to kind of find ways to just help everybody feel comfortable, the student at school and then the parents also, since you're all a team.
My name is Carrie Shade, and I've been a elementary school teacher for 22 years, but I've recently, last few years, have been in the curriculum office, and I am a district instructional coach, and my primary job is to work with teachers that are working with students. I guess personally, through my lens, I know that there's so much more that I don't understand, and so for the first step for me is to really, I understand that I think that I have an understanding of some barriers, but I think there's hidden barriers that I need to make sure that it's more like aware, more explicit, so I have a better understanding of how to even approach to help be a solution.
Okay, something else that's really important when we talk about poverty is that it's not just about poverty. We have a lot of things that intersect with poverty as well, right? Issues of race, issues of family status, veterans that are returning, all these things, they intersect with poverty. And so while we're
I run the pawn shop, so people can come here to cash their checks, or they can come here if they're a little short on cash and give something to me as a pawn item, or they can sell something to me permanently, and so I'm the community pawn shop.
Right now I am looking at a family or individual that needs assistance with paying for rent, and they had to pay their child support.
One is over. All resources are closed. Please close your resource. Come on back to your seats.
Crazy?
frazzled, running around, trying to figure out how to make ends meet. So you could qualify for food stamps,
Oh, yes, I do.
Medicaid,
I need
child
this.
care, or cash assistance. You'll need to fill out an application.
Most of the kids are coming late. They're not prepared. They don't have supplies, and all of them are hungry. So I'm giving them all I can. I'm giving them some money for food for later on, but they're hungry now.
I know.
So families have walked through 3 weeks of living a very under-resourced life, under-resourced in terms of finances, under-resourced in terms of transportation, under-resourced in terms of time, but also under-resourced in terms of relationships and connections within their community. Very few families have been talking to each other and trying to coordinate, right, to try to relieve some of the stress that they're under, because when you're in that mindset, your bandwidth narrows. You're just trying to figure out, how can I get through right now, not planning for the next 2 or 3, 4 weeks. And so they've got 1 week left to try to get through all the things that they need to do with their family. And I think some of them are feeling pretty stressed out about it.
It seems like in moments of desperation, like where they have nowhere else to turn, that's those who are coming to me. So at the beginning, when people felt like they had more resources, I couldn't get a lot of interaction with people. But it's definitely picked up. Like this week, I've had like 4 or 5 interactions. So, yeah.
Now, I'm noticing a discrepancy between the signatures here. I just want to confirm that these are both your checks and you got them from a legitimate source.
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Okay, and how did you end up with 2 checks for the exact same amount and 2 different signatures?
There was a different worker paying checks payroll 1 week.
Okay, give me 1 second. I'm going to confirm this.
We've already had this conversation. We're going to be turning her child over to you.
I'm not going, am I?
So in week 4, we kind of threw a curveball and said that there was an outbreak of COVID in the school, and so we're going to do remote learning for 2 weeks. And what I've seen is not a single kid is at home. In fact, a lot of them are just traveling around with their parents because they don't have childcare to watch them at home, which makes me think that they're probably not spending any time doing their remote work. And as an educator, sometimes one of the first stories I tell myself is, well, the kid must not care, parents aren't doing enough to make sure the kids are getting that done at home. But in reality, what's happening, at least for families that are really under-resourced, they're just trying to get by and figuring out a really tough situation with their kids.
I don't have any money coming in. I'm unemployed, and my car broke down, and I've only paid for my rent. So I've gone to social services, and they gave me a voucher for my utilities, which is great, but I'm going to need some more money.
I feel that everyone should experience this simulation. It's been very eye-opening to me, even being a volunteer for the program.
Let me share with you a story that has really helped to sort of inform the way I take this information and then what I do with this experience. It's a story that goes back all the way to World War II. In the midst of World War II, the United States had developed the B-17 bomber, Flying Fortress, and it's really something that helped win World War II. Except there was a slight problem with it, is that as pilots and crew would go across the English Channel, do their bombing raids, all kinds of danger, life-threatening trips every time. They would fly all the way back, anti-aircraft, right, get all the way back to the runway, and just as they got to the very last 60 seconds of their mission, and the plane would begin to come down, the pilot would reach over, and then all of a sudden the plane would slam on the runway, many times killing the gunners that were in the belly of the plane, and sometimes the entire crew. And it was happening again and again and again. Not all the time, but hundreds of times. Well, it's the middle of war, right? You can't ground the fleet. We win World War II. In 1947, this is still a concern, Lieutenant Colonel Paul Fitz, actually up here at Wright Patton Air Force Base, gets a giant folder on his desk and says, these are only interviews we've done with all the pilots and all the crew and all these crashes, the ones that survived. And you got to figure this out. what's going on. Lieutenant Colonel Fitz spent about 6 months digging through these accounts, going back and interviewing pilots and crew, trying to figure out what in the world is going on. And after 6 months, brings in all the important people and he says, I got 3 things I can tell you of what I know. Number 1, the problem is not your pilots. You are recruiting and getting the right people that have the right knowledge and mindset to do this job. It's not your pilots, it's not your people. Second thing is, it's not your training. You're training these folks how to fly these planes. They know what they're doing. So it's not the pilots, it's not the training, what's left? You take the planes, and he says, it's not the planes. The planes are functioning just fine. There is not a mechanical problem with the planes. And they say, that's not very much help. And he says, I know, but that's all I got right now. That's what I can tell you. So his partner, Alphonse Chupanis, says, you know what, we need to take this next level. I need to get in the cockpit of one of these B-17s. In the cockpit, spends a couple of days in there. We've got the problem. He says it's actually quite simple. He says, see, what happens is, in that last couple minutes of the approach, right as they get over the runway, the pilot is reaching over to lower the landing gear, right? But he's so focused, right? It has such a narrow bandwidth because of the intensity, right? That's like the most critical part of a flight is landing the plane. That instead of reaching for the landing gear, he's reaching one lever over and he's reaching for the flaps and he's raising the flaps of the plane, causing it to dramatically slow down and crash on the runway. Your pilots are behaving exactly as you would expect them to behave in this situation. It's no surprise. The problem is the design of your plane, because the levers were right next to each other and exactly the same. Out of that whole experience, number 1, they began to redesign their cockpits, right? And so the question I have for you is, I want you to think about the cockpits of whatever sphere of influence that you have at the school, whatever your role is. And that you know that you're going to have families that are coming in that are under this kind of stress, that are this kind of narrow bandwidth, because they have very limited resources in this current situation, right? What is something you can do to change your cockpit to make it so when kids and parents are coming in the most stressful situations, you may be blowing up, maybe getting big, maybe making decisions that don't make sense to you, but when they're living in a really other source of resources, like maybe it makes sense to them. What is something that you can change about your cockpit, your sphere of influence, that is going to help them land successfully as they're going through a crisis?
I can see how easy it would be because you feel like you have no other choice or no other option, and survival is key.
I bought it for much lower and sold it for much higher. So I was able to make actually net $90 from buying it. I mean, I would never do that in my life, but in that situation, I had no choice. It's a big
listeners and listen with empathy and an open mind about how we can help.
We've talked about how it was nice to have all of the free breakfast and lunch this year. It really gave a lot of opportunity in terms of feeding children, but also making it less of a stigma. And just a way to have a bank of food and supplies that's for anybody. Especially targeting, this year I tended to, when kids came in late, I asked them, did you have breakfast? And 9 times out of 10 they did, and then I figured, you're late anyway, so I might as well feed them breakfast and get to know them a little bit better. So
talking about that when kids do come in late, sometimes breakfast has already ended, and knowing that we should have that food on hand in the office or somewhere so that kids can get it no matter what time they come to school. And we also talked about communication and how we can communicate effectively that works for everyone, not just on our personal, preferred way of communicating.
We talked about trying to establish like a go-to person within the building where the students would feel comfortable going to and talking to. And did not necessarily have to be a teacher or a principal or secretary. It could be any person in the building that we felt, the kids would feel comfortable with, and hopefully be able to help.
In certain cases, where tangible, where possible, bringing the resources to the families and not expecting them to always come to you to get them. We've seen success. We talked about at Klein with Chevy, the living arrangements there, that we've seen some success bringing some of those resources to them and not expecting them to come to the school. That's something we talked about. And sometimes just stepping out of your comfort zone. There's been some things that we've always said we won't do because we don't do that. But in certain cases with certain families, the only way to get Aaron talked about a cell phone. Like, we would never give our cell phone number out, but to a family, maybe the only way they can communicate is through a text. And for that single family, maybe that's what we need to do, because that's the way we can communicate.
A little bit out of that. First, relational, making sure that we establish a sense of trust and welcoming with all families, and especially the students who come in. And then second, we really wanted to kind of centralize resources in some way. So make sure everybody kind of knew what was available, and we considered a website, or having the district really kind of help to organize that to make sure everybody knows what is available. And especially through the website, that can overcome some language barriers perhaps that also sometimes exist for some of our families, but just trying to make sure that they are well aware, and we are well aware of what we can offer.
Relationships, specifically the relationship with the student, and being more empathetic to what the student is experiencing and going through, so that we can open those lines of communication, so that we can know what the needs of the family and the household.